Hello and welcome to the Chasing Poker Greatness YouTube channel. On this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday, Coach Brad is back with some high-stakes 6-max cash action. Today we're going to break down two hands where Coach Brad really focused on manipulating villain's perception of his range. Stay tuned to find out how Brad's attempts worked out. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
Welcome to another episode of Tactical Tuesday. As always, this is your host, Coach Brad Wilson. I'm joined by Mr. Jonathan Chai. How are we doing, sir?
Doing pretty good. I'm pretty excited today. It's been a while since we've gotten a chance to look at your hand, and it looks like we're going to be playing some pretty high stakes, some 2KNL 6-max.
Yeah, just me in my old age, retirement, playing high stakes poker, putting around the house. I've been battling at some 2KNL, some 1KNL in the streets. So looks like going to start off with, playing a pretty big one here with a queen and a nine of different suits, which is quite the starting hand. I don't know if anybody's looked at the the sims that Tamayo and his team ran at the WSOP, but queen nine, it's a good one. It's one that you're supposed to get in there. So the reason why I opened the button with queen nine off is the small blind is a white belt. And so really just targeting the white belt and the small blind with a very wide range, opening the button. That's really where we start here with the queen and a nine.
No. As far as button opens go, it's not like you're stretching massively. Queen nine.
No, I'd probably be opening queen 8 off as well as queen 9. So we get exactly what we intended, the small blind and the big blind call. And we flop top pair. Flop is 9-7 deuce rainbow. There's $180 in the pot. The hero has both villains covered. I'm sitting with about 5,500. The big blind's got 36, and the fish, aka white belt, has 1,500. We get a donk. So we flop top pair on a rainbow board, 9-7 deuce. We get a donk and a call. And this is kind of the first decision point. With this glorious flop that we have here, flopping top pair with a queen and a 9.
Yeah, interesting spot for sure. I mean, small blind, fish coming out with a donk, not super surprising, especially when you see the donk be for half pot. The big blind calling definitely throws a wrench in what would be my standard plan. My standard plan would just be to follow the neutralized flop leads course guidelines, facing just the donk, but facing the donk and the call. Now I think things get a little bit more murky as to how to proceed. So one of the things that I can kind of foresee happening here, if I were to just start out with call, I guess if we're just going through the options full, I'm just immediately going to take off the table. So won't spend too much time talking about that. But calling, I think what I can foresee happening on the turn is just having to fold a lot, facing another barrel from the small blind on lots of different turns, probably most of the overcard turns that aren't a queen, assuming he barrels a reasonably large size, like half pot plus. And even if he doesn't barrel, I think we are just have like very low visibility, and we're kind of in the dark as to where we are versus both players, even if it gets checked to us.
So we're going to raise to find out where we're at?
Well, finding out where you're at, maybe that's one way to put it. The way that I was going to put it was that I think raising here allows us to realize our equity in the most profitable manner, and allows us to realize our equity most frequently. If we raise here, it's very, very likely that we're going to be able to see the river in one way or the other, or I guess we'll find out where we're at if one of the players decides to 3-bet the flop. But I do like a raise here.
Yeah, I did raise. So I raised at 317. So like 4x, a little bit more than 3x, actually. I wanted to raise because as you said, I think this is the best way for me to realize my equity. I think that it prevents villains from over-realizing their equity. I can get called by much worse and play turns and rivers pretty well. So based on like future playability, it felt like raising queen 9 was the way to go. And, there are some hands that I may just call with that are actually stronger than queen 9. I may call with like aces or kings, right? I think those types of hands would be like totally fine to overcall with because much better visibility downstream, and you're going to realize your equity no matter what with like aces or kings, because you're probably just going to call down. I mean, there are things that can happen that could prevent you, but in general, you're going to realize lots of your equity with aces and kings. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that like there are better hands that I would overcall with, but queen nine seemed to have the right properties for me to raise with. And just going down a rabbit hole, if I'm raising with queen nine, I'm probably going to be raising with like jack 10, 6-8, 8-10 as well. Maybe even like 5-6 with some backdoors. Those would be like my lower equity raises here. So I would raise with some straight draws with backdoor flush draws, as well as like top pair, and then maybe like jacks and 10s and queens, and then flatting like aces and kings.
Yeah, I just want to going back to those straight draw raises on the flop that you were talking about, the jack 10s and the 5-6s. I actually think that those make a lot of sense and are really cool raises on the flop and really fall in line with exactly what we said we were hoping happens with the queen nine, where I think raising the flop with those types of gut shots, those straight draws, is probably the best way to realize your equity, or the most profitable way to realize your equity with those sorts of hands as well, where again, you probably see yourself folding the turn very, very frequently unless you improve, and you're not going to get to realize your river equity essentially. But yeah, anyways, long story short, I really, really like this raise here. I think it's a really neat find with a queen and a nine. And I think like, just kind of big picture strategically, like one of the things that I've kind of moved away from when I first started out playing no limit hold'em cash, like one of the things that I asked myself, one of the things that a lot of, other good players and coaches would ask me, it's like, hey, like, are you bluffing right now or are you value betting, right? Kind of like categorize your hand into one of those two buckets. And I think like in the last few months, I've like really started moving away from that a little bit and more towards just, hey, what's like the highest EV line with my hand, right? And like, am I, if I look at this exact queen nine here, like, am I value betting? I'm not sure. Am I bluffing? I don't think so. But it's like, well, like it's not exactly clear like which, what action, bluff or value betting I'm taking when I raise the spot. And
you can get called by worse.
I'm much more comfortable doing more with that.
Yeah, you can get called by worse. You can get called by better. Like ace nine, king nine can definitely call. But I think by and large, this is probably a value bet. Like if I had to categorize it as either one, it's not.
Yeah, calling it a bluff seems just a little going a little bit too far. But basically what I'm saying is that I'm much less tied to like, hey, like each one of my actions has to clearly fall into one of those buckets. And yeah, I don't feel that need as strongly anymore.
Nice. So the small blind folds, big blind calls. So we get a situation that didn't really expect the big blind to call and the small blind to fold. So the white bell folds and the reg ends up calling. We get kind of another unexpected turn card where our hand actually gets better. Turn is a 9. So 9-9, 7 deuce, full rainbow board. The big blind checks, and I think this is another really interesting decision point.
Yeah. I feel like you should probably go. Your explanation of your thought process here is going to be much, much clearer than mine. Like, what were you thinking here for options once it gets checked to you again? I think I'm guessing like to the listener, to the YouTube viewer, the most obvious option that's going to stand out here is just continue putting money in the pot now that our hand has improved to what is a much more clear value bet than it was on the flop.
Yeah, so there's $902 in the pot. Villain has $3,300, and I've got him covered. So, the SPR's 3.5-ish. I tend to ask myself quite often, like, what do I want Villain to think I have, right? This is like an important piece of my thought process. And like when I raise a flop, okay, so like I don't know if Villain knows that I'm raising 9x, and I'm probably not raising all my 9x, right? Like 8-9 probably doesn't raise because I think like it's harder to get called by worse 9x with 8-9. So like my 9x flop raising hands are going to be ace 9, king 9, queen 9, maybe jack 9 too. 10-9 starts cutting it thin. But I think that like Villain's going to look at my action on the flop and think, oh, so he may have straight draws, may have some strong 9x, may have overpairs, right? Those are really the three buckets of hands that I can have. And what I would like, I guess I could also have sets too. I'll say that. I could also have sets.
Yep.
What I would like villain to think is that I have overpairs for the most part, right? And straight draws would be the two that like I would like to have. I don't think I'm actually supposed to bet this card at a super high frequency with the 9 pairs because I think the big blind should have more 9x than me. And I want to give them a chance to bluff the river, essentially, right? Trying to fold out my overpairs. So like essentially if I don't have any traps in my check behind range, they can just go absolutely berserk on the river and fold out most of my range. And, that's going to happen in like various ways. I think like mostly they're going to check the river and then I'm going to like place a small value bet with like aces or kings, like a third. And then they can start turning like their 7x into bluffs. And just, really putting lots of money in the pot. So like that's kind of the situation that I wanted to happen. I wanted them to think that I have an overpair so that they over-aggress and put lots of money into the pot, trying to fold out my entire range when I have some traps that check back.
Right. So just to kind of paraphrase what you were going for here, it's give off the illusion that you're capped on this turn card so that you induce
Sure.
a large amount of aggression from the villain on the river. And there's various ways that aggression can manifest. They can just overbet facing check on the turn. They can just overbet probe the river, or they can check jam or check raise facing what they perceive to be a thin value bet with a capped range now that you've checked back what likely is not trips on the turn.
And when I check back the turn, I could certainly see them like 1.5xing river at a decent clip with like, their jack 10s, their 6/8s, their 10/8s, those types of hands. So like, it just felt like a situation where if I check back, I'm going to get a lot more action than if I bet. And if I bet and they have like jack 10 or 10/8 or 7/8, 6/7, they're probably just going to fold because like when I bet and the 9 pairs, that is like very strong. At this point, I'm saying I have straight draws and 9x and boats. And their bluff catchers just start folding, I think. So yeah. I check back. Another thing that like I guess I failed to mention is that like when we are blessed that they have 9x, like 8-9 or 9-10 or something like that, I think by checking back, if they check the river, they're going to check raise facing a small bet as well for value. Like I think they're not going to be able to help themselves. So I don't think we lose a ton of action when they have like 8-9 or 9-10 or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely the one category of hand where it almost doesn't really matter what you do. You just coolered them so perfectly on the turn that the money's going to go in somehow.
And if they've got 7s or deuces, then, they cooler me and such is life.
Yeah, right.
So I check behind on the turn. Final board is 9-9-7-7 deuce. There's 902 in the pot. Board double pairs, so now I don't beat their 9x. And they do something a little bit unexpected. They just bet pot. I guess it's not... it's a little unexpected. Once the board double pairs, I think it's pretty unlikely they're bluffing in a giant clip.
Why were you expecting them to overbet some of their missed straight draws on the river, but when they pot this river, that is unexpected?
I actually think so. I think they could overbet their busted straight draws, but I think primarily the node to get lots of money would be them checking the river and me betting a third. That was the primary way that I think like they put in lots of money with their straight draws. Like they could overbet, but I mean the board double pairing, like they're gonna have straight draws in their range, right? Like if I'm looking at this with kings, I'm just calling the river because like, you got jack 10, you got 10-8, you got 6-8. Like there are plenty of like busted straight draws you could have. I just think double paired boards are probably not over bluffed in general.
Gotcha. Okay. And after we see the result of this hand, maybe that's exactly what this guy was going for, was just hoping that you just not think about it too hard and just call with your overpairs, because it's like you said on the turn, that's kind of the that's sort of the illusion that you wanted to give off, right? Was that, hey, like I have a very, very heavy range on the river, like come after me, come after my capped range.
Sure. Yep. And then here, I mean, I felt like I shouldn't just call. I felt like they could have 7x. I felt like they could have deuces full sometimes. I'm just going to be completely honest to the Tactical Tuesday listener. I probably don't have any bluffs here when I raise. I don't have any bluffs, but I felt it was exceptionally likely that I have the best hand. They have quads that beat me. I did think, like, if I have a bluff like Jack 10, what size would I use? And that just kind of led me to clicking the river. Giving them a decent price. You know, they're getting 4-1, and leave it to them to figure out, like, do I just fold everything to this click, or do I find some calls with, like, you know, some of my 7x. I think deuces is going to bet pot on the river. I think 7x is going to bet pot on the river because my range, from their perspective, should be pretty overpair heavy.
Yeah. I think this size makes sense too, just in you know, kind of in theory, where, like, hey, if this guy is representing a polarized range on the river with his pot size bet, if I was going to bluff this spot, I should bluff very, very small, because all I'm trying to do is fold out the bottom of his polarized range, the big straight draws. I don't need to go very big to fold out those hands. I don't need to lose more versus the top of his polar range is boats by jamming the spot. So the kind of the natural size, as you said, that you were led to is just a click on the river. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, I think it makes, I think it's completely reasonable for the big blind to bet pot on the river with a 7, like you said, and you just have the best, you actually just have the best hand of your lot and you're not chopping, because of the fact that you, like we said on the turn, you're just repping over pairs once you check back, and you know, a 7 is just going for the max versus your kings and your queens and your aces and your jacks.
Yeah, they tanked down to 1 second and ended up calling with 7-8 of clubs. So I have to imagine that had I bet the turn, maybe they'll call it some frequency, but I think they're going to primarily fold. And then I think lots of good things happen against on the river versus a hand that's just drawing stone dead.
Right. Yeah. The real, like, interesting result of this hand would have been, instead of this guy having a 7 and having, you know, 8-6 suited or Jack 10 or 10-8 and seeing if you could, you know, win his whole stack essentially by checking back the turn. But we got a pretty good result here. Anyways,
yeah.
Getting $1,800 out of him on the river.
The interesting thing is if the river's just a blank, you know, a 3. Like that was the node that I was, like, really prepping for, a blank and then betting a 3rd.
Yeah.
So hand number 2, we have the kings. Same table, same situation. Same villain, actually, in this hand. This hand happened a little bit earlier. This is how villain got their groove on in the first place. So I opened to $60, playing 2,000 effective at 2K and L. Button, white belt calls. The small blind squeezes.
It's the same two guys from the last.
Same two guys from last hand, yeah. Same party. I click 4-bet to 480. The button folds, and the small blind calls. So there is $1,040 in the pot. I have $1,510 behind. Flop is Jack 10-6 with the Jack 6 of diamonds. I've got kings with the king of diamonds. Villain checks.
I think we should ask the YouTube viewers and the listeners, what would you do here? Would you bet? Would you check? If you're going to bet, what size would you bet? And leave it down in the comments as to what you think we should do, or what you think Brad is going to do. Because we actually showed this hand in a group coaching session yesterday, amongst the Wolves, amongst the players in our CFP, and we got a whole bunch of different answers as to what action Brad should take and why. Everything from, you know, quarter pot to size up. So I think there's a lot of viable strategies that you can take on this flop texture, basically, and all of them have some merit. Yeah, I think I was the only person that nailed your actual the actual action that you took in game. So you want to just talk about what you were thinking here, Brad?
Yeah, and while you're commenting, by the way, go ahead and click the subscribe button. That's also really nice of you. So I think, again, you know, it's this question of, like, what do I want? If I take an action, what do I want villain to think I have, right? That's the theme of today's show, so it's an important concept. And I just ask myself, like, if I jam the flop here, what will villain think I have, right? Like I've got maybe king, queen off that I 4-bet on occasion, ace, queen, ace, king, maybe some like ace, 5 of diamonds type hands. So I actually thought, and also like beyond that, it's just like, what does villain have when they call a 4-bet, right? They're going to have a lot of like suited Broadway type hands. Well, Jack 10-6 connects really well with the suited Broadway hands, like ace jack top pair, king jack, queen jack. Jack 10 is 2-pair, and whatever. If they have 2-pair, they have 2-pair. But I actually thought that, like, if I jam, then they can call it off lighter than usual, thinking that like I've got king, queen, ace, queen, and ace, king in my range. And that was really that was the entirety of my thought process. And I also thought that they would connect with this board pretty reasonably well and have, it wouldn't be surprising to me, for instance, to jam and get called by like, I don't know, ace 10 suited if they have ace 10 suited or something like that too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Would never expect the hand. Would like very, very much expect every single hand that has some pair on the board, everything from 6-7 suited, 5-6 suited up to, the Jack X's to just be forced to call. I mean, it's only, not to say that 150% pot is a small bet, but it's, it's not like some massive overbet jam on the flop. And again, like you said, if the perception that you were going for was that you just have, potentially up to 16 combos of ace king and maybe even 16 combos of ace queen, plus who knows whatever other 4-bet bluffs you have in your range, maybe some sort of hand like ace 8 of diamonds or ace 8 of hearts, ace 7 of diamonds, ace 7 of hearts, like those sorts of hands, then it becomes almost trivial, like calling with all those 1-pair hands and maybe even some of the, stronger, like 2 overs plus gut shot type hands that they could have, so a hand like ace queen themselves. So yeah, I think this is a really cool example of just kind of manipulating villain's perception of what your range is going to be. I think it's really, really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you're over bluffing this spot. And yeah, that's exactly what ends up happening.
Yeah, I jam. They called with sevens, and the turn was a 7. So it was not a happy ending. This actually turned into a bad beat story at the end, but really, really, really happy that villain called with 7s, because like if they're reaching down to 7s, then like, holy cow, they're almost never folding.
The other thing too that I think is really cool about this hand is I don't know how else you get all the money in versus 7s. I mean, without the turn being
the turn being a 7, I'm getting it in every time.
Yeah. Like if you just start out with a different size on the flop, 7s is either just folding the flop, which I think is hilarious. Like if you pick like half pot or something like that, or if you bet quarter pot, maybe they call, maybe they fold, but they're certainly going to fold on a later street. And this is like probably the only way that I can see that you just get all the money in versus a hand like pocket 7s, a hand like pocket 8s, a hand like pocket 9s, and that's boom, that's like 18 combos that they're going to be bluff catching with right there that you just don't you can't stack in any other fashion unless you jam the flop. So I thought that was a really, really cool kind of insight from this hand, or something that we can learn about the pool from this hand, is that like, hey, like this is just, they're calling off with these sorts of bluff catchers. If they even, I think even having 7s in your preflop range peeling the 4-bet out of position is maybe a little questionable, but if they're peeling the 4-bet with these types of hands and then just stacking off on the flop, then man, that just makes your strategy of jamming the flop here such a great play.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. It's nice being back in the streets. Gonna be trying to put a little bit more volume in over the next couple months, and I'm toying with the idea of vlogging about it a little. I don't know if that's gonna happen, so no promises to the Tactical Tuesday listener, but subscribe on YouTube if you don't already, and maybe you'll get some daily Coach Brad vlogs. Not daily, weekly.
Hey, at the least there'll be some play and explains, right? Some P&E highlights.
Yeah, so. Eventually there'll be some P&Es for sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That's all I got for this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
Awesome. Great to have you back in the streets, and see you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please give the video a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps us out a lot and lets us know what type of content you'd like to see in the future. Thanks again for watching this week's Tactical Tuesday.
This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and John Chai. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.